In the event your theories pan out, he has ordered the formation of 9 teams. Now, these teams will operate on a covert, top-secret basis. No one will know of their existence, except the President and the Joint Chiefs.
Hello and welcome to another Stargate lore video. In Stargate, SG teams are considered some of the best soldiers Earth has to offer. Sure, they're not as flashy or impressive as other science fiction soldiers, like the Spartans / ODSTs of Halo, the clone troopers of Star Wars, or the various Space Marine chapters of Warhammer 40k. But when you consider what these teams were asked to do at times, one can't help but admire their willingness to step up and do the impossible.
So I would like all of those willing to attempt the rescue of SG1 to take one step.
At the beginning of the Stargate program, 9 teams were made. By the 7th year, more than 20 were in operation, with the final count being 25 confirmed teams. Keep in mind the program has more military personnel besides the SG teams. The team's main duties would be to perform reconnaissance, determine threats, and look for peaceful contact with other worlds. A later presidential directive expanded their orders to evaluate scientific and cultural value on their mission. As a result, while most SG teams would perform standard recon, a few would also function in certain specialized roles. For example, SG2 and SG3 would perform search and rescue. The original SG7 would deal with scientific and medical situations, SG9 focused on diplomacy, and SG11 would handle missions regarding science, engineering, and archaeology. Now, being soldiers sent into the unknown and often hostile situations, casualties were inevitable, especially given that Earth was effectively at war with the Goa'uld Empire that reigned over the galaxy. You might have noticed I said the original SG7. That's because the original SG7 team died, as in all its members. The team had to be completely reformed and seemingly given a new specialization, focusing more on military matters. And I want to explore that in this video. What did these SG teams have to deal with, and how many teams were completely wiped out? 2 things of note before we begin. First, I will not look at SG1, because then you're getting into hero plot armor, and that's just not fair. Second, unlike SG1, who had a set roster for most of its history, the other SG teams seem to have their members shifted to other teams quite frequently. People being moved around even if their team wasn't all killed. So that means some teams might start off with one group of people, but by the time they were killed off, a new group of people made up the team. Just something to keep in mind as I go through the teams. As despite my wording at times implying it was the same team, again, the members were shifted around a lot. And for simplicity's sake, I'm not going to list every new or past team member unless it is important. Starting off with SG2. An interesting little tidbit is that the original SG2 seemed to be a 3-man team. The team started off with a rough start. Their leader, Major Charles Kowalski, died after having been infected with the Goa'uld and tried to escape the SGC. Despite that rough start, SG2 generally had a pretty good history, often serving as a backup for SG1 on a lot of missions. SG3 was a Marine combat unit that generally had a solid history. The only recorded instance of them taking casualties was during the events of the episode Chain Reaction. When Hammond was forced to retire, Major General Henry Bauer was placed in charge of the SGC. He ordered SG3 to the planet P3S-452, a known Goa'uld stronghold, in order to obtain refined naquita. While the mission was a success, it cost the life of SG3's leader at the time, Major Wade. Another member, Lieutenant Morrison, sustained a serious injury while laying cover fire during the team's escape. So, a little post-ed I have to do here. While working on the video, I was reminded of the events of Into the Fire, where SG1 is captured by Hathor and SG3, 5, 6, and 11 are sent to rescue them. While the battle ended with the death of Hathor and SG1 being rescued, the SG teams that took part took heavy casualties. So SG3 most likely lost people in the battle, but it's not clear who or how many. And this is true for the other SG teams involved. Heck, SG11, which keep an eye on this team and their losses, the various sources I use to double check my notes don't even list this event as one they took part in or lost people. And I notice this happens in other battles like the one in the episode Stronghold. So if I miss any casualties for one of the SG teams, that is most likely why. It's not clear if a team took any casualties in an event, so it wasn't documented. And while we're here, one thing I missed about SG3 was its leader, Colonel Robert Makepeace, was a mole for the Rogue NID, though he wasn't in command of SG3 when he was arrested. SG4 started off as just another standard team, serving in a standard recon and possibly medical role. That was until the Russian Federation pressed for a more prominent role in the Stargate program. It's unknown if the team took any losses before this, but sometime after the conversion, they lost their leader, Lieutenant Colonel Sergei Ivanov, whose DNA was altered by Nirti, and these changes resulted in him turning into a puddle of water. That's not a joke, by the way. It's a little unclear if SG4's role as the Russian team was kept, as they weren't heard from much after this. They weren't seen again until Universe, when the Tari plan to take over the Langaran Gate to dial Destiny, but if the team is still Russian, it's hard to tell. There's also some sources that say John Shepard was given command of SG4 when the Atlantis expedition was forced to return home when the Lanteans took control of Atlantis. If true, the team is clearly no longer all Russian. Either the all-Russian team was removed when more nations were made aware of the program, or a new team was made the all-Russian team, which we'll cover when we get to a later team. SG5 was another standard recon team. The only real blip on the team's history was during the events of The Light, when the team encounters a light emitter machine in a Goa'uld opium den. The light created by this machine memorizes anyone who looks at it, acting like a drug, and if one is too far away from the pestle that creates said light, they start to feel the withdrawal, which include depression and other thoughts I can't say on YouTube. These thoughts that shall not be named resulted in the death of the entire SG5 team. SG6 is what I'm going to call the Lost SG team. It served as one of the standard SG teams until they were sent to the planet P3X-118. For you see, while SG6 traveled to the planet, it wasn't SG6 that returned. It was the Shoggoth returning disguised as SG6, and began taking control of the SGC, leading to the infamous Foothold event. However, the reason I call SG6 the Lost SG team is because we don't know what happened to them afterwards. The Shoggoth's mimic technology seems to require that that person being mimicked kept alive. So going by that logic, SG6 could have been, at the very least, hanging from a ceiling when the Shoggoth took their form and returned to the SGC. But when the Foothold situation ended, if SG6 was alive, the Shoggoth had no reason to keep them around. But at the same time, they might have chosen to keep the team prisoner. We just don't know, and no further teams were sent to the planet. SG6 would be reformed and continue to serve on some missions, like a few teams I've mentioned before, but unlike other teams, they would continue to suffer losses over the team's history. 2 members were lost during the events of Red Sky, when the launch pad the SGC were using to send a rocket to save a planet's sun exploded. This was caused by several native radicals who believed the damage to their star was the will of the gods. They also were the team that was infected with the Ori plague that they unknowingly brought back to Earth. And it's unclear if these team members would survive. One of them was a carrier, but we do know that of those killed by the plague, at least 5 were SGC personnel, which is kind of ironic given the next team, SG7, serving in standard recon along with scientific and medical roles. They first appeared in the episode Singularity, where they were setting up an observatory to observe a black hole. However, the entire team was killed when Nirti released a virus on the planet. Later, it seemed the team was reformed into a more combat-based unit. For example, they were part of the mission to rescue SG13 during the events of Heroes Part 1 and 2. And while SG7 didn't take any losses during that mission, we'll get to those events soon enough. Fun fact, SG7 might have been remade at least once more after Singularity. This comes from the book Kali's Wrath, where a version of SG7 was almost completely wiped out except for one person. This happened in a 3-way battle between SG7, Jaffa, and the Ritu. You don't have to count the books as canon, but I thought this was an interesting point to note. SG8 weirdly doesn't have much history to it, though I did find it funny that they were the ones who brought that fast-growing plant to the SGC.
It's a plant.
SG9 seemed to have a unique role being a diplomatic team, which is funny given the team's starting history, as the first iteration of the team is infamous for being the first, and I'm pretty sure the only team to go AWOL from the SGC. On the planet P3X513, the team's leader, Captain Jonas Hansen, went a little crazy and set himself up as the god to the people of the world. While Lieutenant Baker went along with the captain's insanity, the other team members, Lieutenant Thomas Franks and Lieutenant Lawrence Connor, attempted to dial Earth and warn them of what was going on. Lieutenant Franks was killed, but Connor was able to get word to the SGC to stop Hansen's plan. This ended in the death of both Hansen and Baker, leaving Connor the sole survivor of SG9. He was promoted to captain for his efforts and put in charge of SG11.
Oh no!
A later version of SG9 would almost be wiped out again during the events of Sentinel. While attempting to re-establish diplomatic relations with Latonia, the team was attacked by Stravog's forces, leaving a single survivor. SG10 is the first new SG team outside of the original 9, and their first mission resulted in the death of the entire team. Kind of. So I have to explain this on a few different levels. The team's first on-screen mission was during the events of the episode In the Line of Duty. However, later, during a matter of time, SG10 was trapped on the planet P3W415 when a black hole came too close to the planet and, well...
Their bodies will be pulled apart by increasing tidal forces.
Now, during this episode, Jack says this was the team's first mission, despite showing up earlier. A fan explanation I've seen is that Jack meant this specific group of people, that this was either their first mission off-world or as SG-10. Though one thing to note is that in the books A Matter of Honor and The Cost of Honor had SG-1 to go on a rescue mission to save the trapped SG-10 5 years after the black hole incident, though from the perspective of SG-10 it was only a few hours, saving all but one member of this version of SG-10, because remember, no one gets left behind. Next we have SG-11, and yeah, I kind of gave this away earlier, but this team is kind of cursed. You can see this with the team in various roles: recon, scientific, engineering, archaeological. The reason this team had so many roles was because this team kept getting wiped out or had some very close calls. Now, the first recorded mission of SG-11 didn't result in the team's demise, but stop me if this sounds familiar. An SG team is captured by aliens and impersonates them to enter the SGC. Now, admittedly, there are some big differences between why the spirits and the Stargate did what they did. The Stargate seem to want to make Earth their new home, most likely via conquest, while the spirits were testing to see if the Tari could be trusted. A test the SGC failed when it was revealed that the US government planned to mine trinium on the spirits' planet, despite the human natives telling them no. Again, SG-11 survived this, but given the spirits did plan to destroy the SGC, I can't imagine they would just let SG-11 go if they had gone through with the plan. Or maybe they would just keep them in the void for eternity. Unfortunately, this luck would not hold, as when we next heard about SG-11 was during Rules of Engagement, where we learned they had been listed MIA for months. They had been captured by Apophis and forced to teach the Jaffa and human recruits the ways of Earth's military so they could infiltrate and destroy the Tari. As for their ultimate fate,
One day, their bodies were put on display in the encampment.
and as I hinted, this was not the last time an SG-11 team was wiped out. Later, while excavating fossils on the Ghoul Old Homeworld, this version of SG-11 seemed to be more focused on archaeology. 2 members were killed by Unis, 2 were taken over by wild symbiotes and were killed. No future version of SG-11 would be wiped out again, but they had 2 or 3 close calls. First, when Anubis invaded Kelowna, SG-11 and SG-15 were sent to help, and well, as the commander said,
8 men. That's all you brought?
8 good men.
Now, I appreciate Jack's confidence, and he does admit the main problem is the ship. I'm also sure these 2 SG teams would have aid from the remaining Kelownan forces, But you have to admit, if you were on SG11 and you overheard this,
There are over 1,000 alien soldiers in the city. Their weapons are more powerful than anything our forces have ever seen.
you'd be a little nervous. Thankfully, no one in SG11 died that day. The same cannot be said for the next close call. While on the planet P3X403, the team was sent to set up a mining operation. However, this was not received well by the local UNIS, who killed one Lieutenant Ritter. And had it not been for the actions of Daniel and Chaka, the rest of the team would have been wiped out too. One last event I thought I'd bring up happened in Death Kneel. During the episode, a Cold Warrior wiped out the Alpha site, and SG11 is sent to help in search and rescue. Now, SG1, 3, and 21 were also sent, so I doubt they were in any danger. But similar to the Kelowna situation, I have to imagine seeing this and hearing that the call that did this might still be in the area made someone on the team a little nervous. SG12 was a standard recon team, one that suffered a complete wipeout in the episode Allegiance when the Goa'uld attacked a Tok'ra base. The team would suffer a few losses over its history. While investigating the Sodan's destruction, a man named Stevens was killed and a man named Conway was seriously injured by a zombified Sodan. Later on, one of them was injured via mauling by a mysterious creature, but this team has, in my opinion, the funniest injury of any SG team. On a mission, one of the team members broke his ankle and they had to return home 3 days early. However, this was when Earth and some other planets were stuck in a time loop, so this guy kept breaking his ankle on the same day for a period of about 3 months, possibly longer.
My leg!
SG13 you think would be the worst team to be assigned to, given the number and the major event it took part in, but if you think about it, not really. The only event they're known for is in the Heroes 2-parter. Sure, Wells was severely injured and Janet lost her life in the battle saving him, which is a tragedy for the SGC, but no one on SG13 died. The team is never mentioned directly outside of these episodes, though they do play a role in the book A Cost of Honor, where they let Daniel and Teal go on a rescue mission to save the rest of SG1, and later volunteering to take part in an important battle. Again, the team never popped up again in the show, and if you think about it, the events of the Heroes could have happened to any of the SG teams. So I don't really think this team is all that unlucky, especially if you compare it to SG11. Heck, their name was even used in a Stargate fan film. If you want to talk about unlucky SG teams, look at SG14. The entire team was wiped out when they were brainwashed by the Goa'uld. One was killed during the mission where 2 members got brainwashed. One was killed by one of the brainwashed team members, and the final 2 succumbed to the Goa'uld programming and, well... Though at the same time I say that, a later version of SG14 did manage to observe a Goa'uld outpost and get out without being detected, so they might not be that unlucky. SG15 is kind of sad because they start and end in tragedy. The first time we hear of SG15, they were completely wiped out during a Jaffa ambush in the episode Divide and Conquer. Granted, this is never outright stated in the show, but we learn that 6 SG team members died during the battle, and various Stargate lore sources state that SG15 was completely wiped out during this event. What's sad is that after this event, they seem to have a decent history taking part in various off-world operations. That was until the last we heard of SG15 was when all were killed in an explosion on Earth, inside a warehouse booby-trapped by the Trust. Beyond the sadness of their deaths, I kind of find it tragic that they all died on the world they swore to defend at the hands of Earth-born humans. It's just salt in a wound. SG16 is just there, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, the team is mentioned during the episode Ascension to examine a possible weapon, but no big tragedy. I mean, I guess it was for Orlin, but he's not on SG16. We're almost at that point where there's just not much on some of these SG teams, though that can't be said for SG17, as all members were killed during the events of Summit and Last Stand when Goa'uld forces attacked the Tok'ra base. 3 members of the team died when debris fell on them. The final member, Elliot, one of the kids from Proving Grounds, blended with a Tok'ra to survive. And later both sacrificed themselves to release a chemical into the planet's atmosphere, killing every symbiote within reach. As for SG18, 19, and 20, well, we really don't know anything about them. Some of these teams we only know exist because there's an SG21. Though before we go on to that team, I thought I'd bring up a little thing I learned. While doing research for this video, I kept seeing SG20 listed as a Russian team, which confused me because SG20 is one of those teams we only know exist because of SG21. I went looking for this and found this lore comes from the Stargate Alderac RPG core rulebook, which includes a little lore table about the various SG teams, such as their roles. Some are different from the roles in the Stargate lexicon, as well as having some team members from the RPG. The RPG actually accounts for this by stating that the team's compositions and roles were constantly changing in the show, and players should feel free to change how they design their teams from what they outline. I want to stick to on-screen stuff for this video, but I thought this was cool and a little funny because if we count what the RPG says, we kind of know more about SGs 18, 19, and 20 than we do about 21. SG21 has no named members, and the only mission they are known to have gone on is the one during Death Kneel. SG2 is odd because it's just one of those teams that kind of exists. Like, they did stuff, they went on missions, but no team got wiped out. And I find that odd because the next two teams, SG23 and 24, are again teams we only know are there because of the existence of SG25. SG25 had one close call where the whole team was attacked and severely injured by an interdimensional creature during the events of Uninvited. But according to Vala, they would all make a full recovery. And that's the end, as SG25 is the last known numbered SG team. It's interesting to have looked through each SG team, what they did, and how some versions of those teams came to an end. It reminds me of Halo, where the main POV is usually of this heroic figure or figures that kicks butt and takes alien names, but if you delve into the background characters or lore, you'll find a lot of death.
Because all those hours playing Halo didn't prepare me for this.
Now, Stargate is nowhere near as dark as Halo, and in fact, the SG teams show how much Star Trek DNA is in the show, as the SG teams kind of function a bit like red shirts. They're there to kind of be background characters and show a greater military structure. Given Stargate is sort of a war story, people were going to die. You can't really have your main characters die, at least not constantly. So it's good to have background teams that you can kill off and replace. And tying back to Star Trek, a number of these SG teams died on exploration missions, which is just something that's bound to happen when you explore the unknown. To paraphrase something from Star Trek 3 Beyond, sometimes the frontier pushes back. To be clear, this doesn't mean SG teams were dying all the time. They seem to have standard missions, they would go on, come back, and nothing major would happen. But the nature of these SG teams gave the writers room to show the danger the big threats were by having the teams get wiped out. On that note, one thing I wish we got to see more of were teams having specializations. Like, we kind of see this every now and again with some teams being mentioned as Marines.
Well, I pulled him out of the gate room just as SG3 was coming back. What's with those Marines anyway? Don't they know we've got a scenario playing out here?
But for example, the Stargate Lexicon, Guidebook, and RPG say SG9 specialized in diplomacy, but the SG team sent to help the Jaffa in building their new nation's government is SG7. And to the people who are going to comment the TV show doesn't have to hold to the lore, you're right, but the Lexicon and Guidebook were written by someone whose job it was to keep track of the lore set up in the show. I'm not saying a detail like this ruins Stargate, but you have to admit, it would have been cool if team specialization mattered a bit more. But what do you all think? If you had to pick an SG team to be on that is an SG1, which would you pick and why? If you had an enemy or rival, which team would you put them on? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below, leave a like and subscribe, follow me on my social medias, and remember...
All right, let's go, move out. Let's go, move!